Thanks so much for doing this interview today.
Thanks for having me.
It's okay. Melissa, your academic background in art history and philosophy is so unique. How has that shaped your work?
Well, I think my interest has always been very psychological, like thought. I think a lot about the work that I want to make as an artist. So having the academic background was quite essential for me in terms of building a practice that was very well thought through, particularly the art history, because I think if you could know where you situate yourself in that timeline of art history, then that's one of the most valuable things that you can have as a contemporary artist. So it's not just thinking about what you want to make in the present, but also thinking about hundreds of years in the past and why one movement came about, what were the circumstances contextually to lead to those artists making work in that particular way. So art history really helped me think mindfully about what's going on in the world at the moment, what has come before, and how that's all come to make me and other artists like me who we are today. And then the philosophy is really just about learning how to think and how to think critically. So in terms of building a visual language and a philosophy behind your own work, knowing how to think and how to think critically was really, really important.
And you've had an experience in New York studying. How has that helped you along your journey?
Well, New York was kind of the epicenter for abstract and early conceptual art in terms of abstract expressionism in the post-war era. So even though I wasn't totally aware of that when I went in 2018 during uni, I think the psychological history of the landscape was very much felt. So I went and I had a great time. There was a lot of classical history of New York was really significant because the art school that I went to taught the Florence style of classically layering paint. And then retrospectively, several years later, looking back on it and learning about the New York School of Abstract Expressionism and the artists like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko and Motherwell that came out of that was really exciting. So I ended up doing my uni thesis on abstract expressionism in New York, and because I had been there and I knew the streets and I knew the environment and the landscape, that helped me make sense of the work even more.
Are you a deep thinker?
I think all of the art that I make is very much a reflection on what I think deeply about. So when I'm thinking deeply, the art is just kind of the consequence of whatever I'm mulling over. And so that can be, a lot of it is existential, kind of why are we here? How did we get here? But then also what do we do with this kind of incredible miracle of a little time that we have on planet Earth? And I think art is a great way of processing all these deep thoughts and also doing something valuable with the short time that we have.
Your artwork explores transformation, survival, and a deep emotional resonance. What is it about these three things that art draws you in?
Transformation,
survival, and
emotional resonance. Yeah. Well, I think art, in terms of figurative art that you connect with and you can see a recognizable subject, is incredibly emotionally resonant. In a different way to say abstract or conceptual art, where the work is kind of flung onto you and you're immersed in those feelings, whereas the emotional resonance that I like to create through figurative painting is, I guess it starts psychologically because you might be thinking about the subject matter or what's going on intellectually, but then there's still a lot of kind of deep emotional connection that you have just by seeing a human subject that you connect with emotionally. In terms of this idea of transformation, that's more on a personal level. Like I see this wonderful opportunity that we have as human beings to make the most of this lived experience and to keep improving on ourselves. So not just kind of sleepwalk through life, but it's constantly about transformation and change and cycles. And art is just the avenue that I use to explore that.
Have you gone through many cycles yourself?
Yeah, I think you never really stop. In terms of cycles, I mean, that's happening all the time. It's like weekly you start the start of the week in a particular way, and then it's this up and down roller coaster, and then also throughout the year, and each time you start a new season I can feel that shift and that change, but it's not like you ever end up back to the start again. So yes, there's kind of these ebbs and flows and up and downs, but if I look back over the last few years, especially in a full-time career that I'm doing, it's more been like seasonal. Like I can see these different seasons that I've been in, and it's not like I'm coming back to the start of the cycle, but each year as you're going through the seasons and you're getting back to the beginning, I feel like I've learnt a lot and I've grown a lot, but I'm definitely not the same person.
And when did this change into a full-time career?
About 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So 3 years ago, I quit my job. It wasn't like it was another career. I was a cook at a vineyard, and I was doing my thesis at uni. So my goal was always to do art in some capacity. I didn't know if that was going to be like art history or working at a museum or with a collection, that kind of thing, or more research. But I knew I wanted to use my art interest in my job in some capacity. So quitting the job at that stage was kind of just like a necessary step. But I think the key thing that's different is that I never ended up being employed. I've just always managed to stick it out being self-employed and doing my own thing.
And studying in New York, did you get a lot of technique from studying there?
Yeah, I didn't do a full degree, but I think that was really important because it meant that I had my base in Perth to do the academic side. And then I did a summer residency there for about a month or two from memory. And it was very intensive, 5 days a week. And each day we were doing a different type of practice, whether that was painting, drawing, sculpture, and also having a studio practice on the side. So it was kind of like a degree squished into a few weeks. And I think that's one of the best ways to do it because it's very intensive and you really fully immerse yourself. And I've never really looked back after that. I think that's when I realised that classically painting is what I wanted to do, that I wasn't interested in more of kind of the conceptual ways of making art, that I wanted to work figuratively and use oil paint, use layering. And since then it's really been a case of figuring out what is my visual language and the subject matter that I want to paint with those techniques. I stayed in Union Square in New York, so that was a nice hub because you're just above, you're still kind of downtown, but you're not like right down in Tribeca, which is where I was studying. So it had the hustle and bustle of Midtown, kind of the dregs of that coming down, and then you also had the kind of neighborhood feel of Brooklyn and the downtown vibe. So it was a really great hub, and you kind of, after a while, you get into a bit of a rhythm of the routine of the city. And I always remember where I was staying on 14th Street, and I would get the train from Union Square, ride it up to Prince Street, I think, and then get off and then walk to the art school. And it would always be the iconic kind of pizza joint on the corner that you would go for $1 slice, and that would be your lunch every day. And New York cookies. But it's interesting because I went back for the first time in October last year, and it's changed a lot. So it doesn't have that same 24-hour kind of cycle that it used to. Whereas before you could literally go out at 2 a.m. and get pizza or cookies or a drink. Whereas now, I don't know if this is absolutely everywhere in New York, but I did notice a shift and a change, and some of those old places that I loved weren't around anymore. And I think that's just a post-COVID thing as well, and things have changed and the culture's changed.
When someone steps in your world through your paintings, what do you hope they pick up through it?
For this new body of work that I'm doing, it's really all about getting people to recognise their potential. Particularly this collection of battery hens that I've painted. So there's 12 hens, like a dozen chickens, and they're all taking flight. And I want these works to be like affirmations. So when you have it up on your wall, you look at it and you remember, don't be the chicken in the cage, like take flight. And I think there's this tendency in modern life, particularly in somewhere like Perth, where we live such comfortable, wonderful lives for the most part. And that's not to undermine the people that have certain struggles in particular ways. But on the whole, we have a great lifestyle. We've got lovely weather, big homes, pretty good wages. yes, there's issues, but I see a lot of people living really great lives, and I think that fosters this desire to stay quite comfortable. People work from home, they order Uber Eats to their front door, they watch Netflix, and you can kind of just live that life and live a really great life without even having to leave your front door. So this work, I'm drawing from old stories of myths and biblical tales and stories from history that are really quite intense and full on and powerful, but the hope is that it really kind of shakes people and makes them remember that they're human and that they're alive and that they can do so much with these wonderful lives. But not just in a sense of like, you have to do this or you should do this, but that it's your right to do that, that we all have a right to live a life where we can fulfill our potential. And there is that individual responsibility, but there is also a societal responsibility in governance and the way that our society is set up to make sure people can flourish and thrive.
This body work feels intensely personal. What do you hope people get?
I think I want people to feel empowered to take flight like the chickens in the cage. Except the chickens in the cage aren't just sat there kind of scratching at the dirt, they're flapping their wings and trying to escape and fly. So as cliche as that sounds, I think it's something that we can all hold on to and remember and remind ourselves to do. So there's that element through the show, but I also just want people to experience classical painting in a way that when you go to Europe or North America or any kind of major gallery with historical work, people are frequently drawn to those old paintings from history. Like we always think of things like the Mona Lisa or Michelangelo, but they're the works that I think for the most part really resonate with people because they're stories about human beings. And there's definitely been a trend for the last 100 years or so that moves away from figurative painting, but I think it's coming back. And by making figurative work with contemporary modern day subjects, I hope that people can go and they can have an experience that they might not usually have in Perth.
What do you mean figurative painting's coming back?
When I was in New York and went back to my old art school and also went to a lot of the contemporary galleries over there, I noticed a real big shift from when I was there in 2018, because pretty much every single new gallery, like contemporary new gallery, was showing figurative art in some capacity. So whereas 5-6 years ago, pretty much everything was more conceptual or abstract, this time, even if it was a group show, there would be 1 or 2 works that featured something that was figurative. And by figurative, I mean that it's a recognizable object or a scene. So like not just landscapes or portraits, but it could be like a still life or something like that, even if it has a modern or contemporary twist on it. So that was exciting to me because that signaled to me that we're kind of talking about cycles, going back through another cycle again and returning to where art has been historically, which is grounded in real things. Abstract art, conceptual art has only really been around for the last 100 years max. But then if you look back through the last 1,000 years, there are definitely these peaks and troughs and cycles that art history takes. And I think a great example of that is you've got the Renaissance, the Baroque, and then Mannerism that kind of came in that order. And the Renaissance was seen as the kind of high art period where everything was very ordered and mathematical and perfect. And then the Baroque was very similar but much more dramatic and emotive and intense. And then by the time you get to Mannerism, the conventions that you had in the Renaissance were getting even more undone. And so Mannerism is known because people would do portraits where the necks would be super long or the fingers would be long and slender. So the proportions weren't totally perfect anymore. And it worked at the time because it was different and there was more room for the artist's individual flair. But we look back on it now and a lot of people think it's great, but a lot of people also think it's kind of tacky and funny. So I do think that art goes through these cycles where there'll be moments of peaks and troughs, and things will constantly go through these stages of undoing, and then new conventions will emerge out of that. And I do wonder if that's happening at the moment, that conceptual art has been around for a certain period of time, and now people are maybe starting to return to more classical experiences of art. But who knows? We'll never know until we look back retrospectively in 100 years' time.
The landscape in Svalbard seem to have significant impact in your work. How did this shape your new show?
So I went to Svalbard really without any major intentions of making art. I kind of just went with an open mind and an open heart just to really see what it would bring. And when I went, it kind of fit this missing puzzle piece that I think I was looking for in this new body of work, because most of the work in the show is very dark and dramatic. It has that Baroque influence, so very dramatic portraits and compositions, a lot of light and dark contrast. And when I was in Svalbard, it was midnight sun, which basically means the sun didn't set the entire time. Because it's at 78 degrees north, you're so close to the top of the Earth that in the middle of summer, when the Earth tilts, the sun never actually sets. It's just constantly going around the horizon. So I didn't have any of that light and dark contrast. It was just daylight, even at 2 a.m. So psychologically, that was interesting. But then also in terms of the colours that I was seeing, the light, and if I did want to do any painting, that's what I was dealing with. So that was a big contrast to the really deep, dark, shadowy work that I'd been making.
When you were doing that experience, was there anything else that was going on in your life? I've seen the selfie you've taken to do your painting. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I did a self-portrait when it was a big snowmobile expedition that I was doing. And it's painted on paper, which is interesting because obviously it's postcard size, so when you're traveling, it's perfect. And paper, it's very tactile, so it was the type of work that was great to do on an expedition, I guess. It was the right medium for the environment and the experience. But that particular expedition was a snowmobile expedition to the remote east coast of Svalbard. So it was about 180 kilometers of traveling in a very, very long day. And that particular photo was taken towards the end of the expedition. And there was a specific moment that will always stand out to me from that trip. And one thing that really is important is the fact that I was on a snowmobile for the first time. So I'd never driven one of these before. So that was a new experience and I was nervous about it, but very quickly I realized that this is really easy. Like it's just like riding a quad bike. So that I was driving after 2 or 3 hours, I thought this is great. There's no challenge here. And then we start going up the glacier because we get to pretty much the end of the destination. And the glacier is quite high and you're traveling along it for quite a long time. And when you get down to the other end of the glacier, we knew that we would be on frozen sea ice and that would be the end of the island and then we would come back. That was kind of the challenge of the trip that I wasn't anticipating and I think really influenced the work. So yes, the selfie, but also the more complex major works in the show. We went up the glacier and it was incredible because it had been beautiful blue skies all day, but then as we're going up the glacier, there's this cloud that's kind of descending down on us, or we're ascending up into it. And it was almost like it was gradual and then suddenly we were in a total whiteout and you couldn't see anything. And the only way that we could navigate was through the GPS. So the guide had his GPS and then someone followed him and followed them and we were just in a line and you could only really see about 1 or 2 snowmobiles in front of you. So we went through that and that was when I felt this challenge for the first time of the trip, which is not a physical challenge but a mental challenge, because physically it was easy to just hold the snowmobile in place, but when you don't have any kind of form of reference because everything's bright white, you really have to focus. And then you start thinking about how remote you are and there's literally no one around you're on a glacier, so you know there could be crevasses, but as long as you stay on the GPS direction or route, you should be okay, but you never know. And then we start descending. So I reckon we were on that glacier for maybe 45 minutes in this whiteout. So we start descending onto the sea ice. So it's about a meter or two thick, maybe even less, and then it's just ocean underneath us. The snowmobile guide starts coming up to a stop, and I'm thinking it's time for lunch. He tells us when we get to the other end, we'll be stopping for lunch. And I come slowly up next to him, and then as we look ahead, I realize it's not time for lunch, because there's a giant polar bear walking along the snowmobile track. And then that was this other challenge, but in a different way, because first of all, you're not even aware that this is one of the most dangerous predators in the world. You're just aware that you feel like you're watching something on a television screen in front of you. Mm-hmm. It was like National Geographic, especially through the binoculars. I mean, the bear was maybe 200 meters away, so very close. Mm-hmm. You barely even needed binoculars. And then the realization sets in that people get attacked by bears. And it was only when I realized that the guide went into survival mode and got out the rifle and made everybody kind of stay calm and quiet that you remember that this is a really dangerous animal. But that was incredible. And so all of those ideas of, I think, survival and transformation, like we were talking about before, and this process of traveling through the whiteout, almost like you're descending into another realm, was a very spiritual experience, and that added another dimension to the body of work that I hadn't done before.
If you could change one thing about the art world and you could wave this magic paintbrush, what would it be?
That's a hard one, and I think my answer will be different now to what it was a year ago or in a year or two's time. I don't feel like I know enough about the art world to critique it inside out, but from my perspective at the moment, still very new into the art world, I think the thing that's always going to be a big challenge for artists is the gallery world and the commercial side of things, because our kind of main goal is just to make the art. That's all we want to do. That's what drives us, to be authentic and to make work that resonates with us. But then there's also this other very real aspect of it, which is that you have to make a living. There's also this really real side to it where you've got to make connections and make a living. So navigating that is a challenge. In saying that, there's still so many amazing people and organisations out there that cut through.
Is there a part of you that feels like there's pressure to make things more commercially successful?
Every now and then that little niggling voice comes in and says, how could I make something that is more palatable? But I think with this body of work, I've been quite dominant in the other voice, which is don't shift or bend to what I think people are going to want, because ultimately people can always tell. People can always pick up when something is authentic or not. And recently I've been quite clear with myself that there's really no point doing this full time if I'm going to be making stuff for someone else and not for myself. I've got a lot of good mentors. Yeah. I mean, Jo Darville is another artist in the building from Perth, and she's incredible, and she's been a really great mentor to me. Also people like Robin Ely, who's a figurative artist in Adelaide and has made it really big in his own practice. And then other people as well who aren't necessarily visual artists, but creatives in the world or professionals in Perth in the arts, like Mark Coughlin, have been really great just to kind of advise me and keep me on track. So I think having mentors around are really, really valuable. So a lot of it is instinctive, but having those voices that I respect and want to listen to, you can't really beat having that. It's so valuable.
Can we talk about classical painting versus contemporary art? Do you feel like your work with classical painting is out of step with the fast changing trends of contemporary art?
I think some people would say so, but the thing I think is different with my work as opposed to just traditional painting is that what I'm dealing with is yes, it's classical techniques, but it's modern day contemporary subjects. So it's people in contemporary clothing. They look like modern day people. And then I try to push boundaries in terms of colour and lighting as well, and also bringing in surreal aspects. So a sheep in the Arctic landscape, or a sheep that's so shadowy that you can barely see it. So yes, it's traditional techniques, drawing from what I know and what I love about contemporary painting, and then weaving that in as well. So I think you can never really preempt what is going to be the right thing in the art world. You just have to be authentic. And I wouldn't argue that I'm repeating the past. I think I'm taking techniques from the past and combining it with the present. A lot of my work features this darkness in terms of very flat space of blackness. And that is a very psychological space in the works for me. So because there's so much going on in the compositions, it's almost like this empty black space is a space for the eye to rest and reflect on the work. And then when I was in Svalbard and the lighting was so bright and intense, it made me think that whereas the black space is a space that's very psychologically charged, the experience of the whiteout was a total absence of thought, because you're only thinking about surviving. And it's almost like this ethereal kind of metaphysical substance where you don't really exist in this ego kind of grounded space anymore. So it's all about surrendering to the whiteout.
So thanks so much for sharing today, Melissa. I know you're going to have a great future ahead, and best of luck with your new show that's coming up.
Thank you.